Phoenix mornings have a way of pretending everything is ordinary. The light is generous and forgiving, pouring through the kitchen window in long, buttery ribbons that turn dust into glitter. The neighborhood hums with its familiar chorus sprinklers ticking somewhere 3 doors down, a dog protesting the mailman's arrival, the distant hiss of traffic on the freeway. Inside my house, the old pendulum clock above the doorway gave its small, stubborn heart to each second. I had just finished rinsing the last plate, warm porcelain against my palms, when the day slipped out from under me. Before that, it was all comfortingly routine. My older son, Stephen, left early for the architectural firm blue shirt, coffee in a travel mug, brow furrowed with plans he kept in his head like cathedral ribs. My 7-year-old grandson, Matthew, had bounded out the door with his lunchbox, waving from the bus steps as if the day could never run out. And Araceli, my daughter-in-law, Stephen's wife, floated her voice down the staircase like a silk ribbon. "Mom, I'm going to take a quick shower." "All right, honey," I called back, smiling at the ceiling as if a smile could travel through floorboards. A trace of jasmine followed her everywhere she walked. The scent lingered even after she turned on the water upstairs. It beat steadily on tile, a sparkling veil of sound. I wiped my hands on my apron and reached for the dish rack. That was when the landline rang, that stubborn relic with its knotted cord and sun-yellowed plastic. Something about landline calls feels ceremonial, older than the phones that live in our pockets. I picked up and tucked the receiver between my shoulder and ear. "Mom!" The voice bloomed into the kitchen, cheerful, youthful, the wind in it somehow. Ivan, my younger son. The dreamer who had actually become a co-pilot, who had learned the language of clouds and runways and the infinite patience of the sky. "Hi, my love," I said, warmth loosening the morning. Hearing Ivan's voice is always a kind of holiday for me. It turns the kitchen into a place lit from within. "How's the layover?" "Good, good. Just wanted to say hi. I've got a few minutes before I board again." I imagined him in his crisp uniform, the silver wings catching light. "Are you eating, sleeping?" I asked, falling into the rhythm that mothers fall into even when their children are taller than they are. He laughed, that bright, boyish laugh I have memorized. "I'm fine, Mom. Everything's smooth today." A tender quiet opened between us, the kind you earn with years of loving. Upstairs, the shower was still going, steady, harmless. I remember thinking how peaceful it all felt, how dependable. Then Ivan's laughter thinned. His voice gathered itself, as if stepping carefully into a room only he could see. "Hey, Mom. Something weird just happened." I straightened, the dish towel in my fingers suddenly too heavy. "What is it?" He hesitated. I could hear the airport around him, the murmur, the roll of suitcase wheels, an announcement kissing the edges of his words. "My sister-in-law is at the house, right?" I blinked toward the stairs. The water still ran. Steam was probably drifting under the bathroom door like fog. "Of course, honey. Araceli's upstairs taking a shower." Silence took a slow, deliberate step toward us. "Mom," Ivan said, voice low. "That's impossible." The word landed strangely in my chest, like a coin dropped in a well. "Impossible?" "Because I'm holding her passport." His whisper tightened. "She just boarded my flight to France." The kitchen, bright and clean only moments before, seemed to wobble around me. "You must have seen it wrong, sweetheart," I said gently, as if soothing a fever. "She's here. She told me she was going to shower." Ivan didn't laugh. He didn't tease. There was only the sound of breath, then his voice, careful and exact, building the story like a bridge. After boarding, I ran back to grab some paperwork and I saw a passport near the gate. I picked it up to hand it to staff and he paused. Something shocked him again just in the telling. "It's Araceli's. Photo, name, everything." I went down the aisle to check and, "Mom, she's in first class. She's sitting next to a man older, well-dressed. They're talking close. Like they know each other. Like a couple." The word couple was a shard of glass between my ribs. I pressed my palm to the counter. Upstairs, the water kept singing its bright lie. I have always trusted my sons. Ivan is earnest the way the sky is large, constant, guileless. He has no reason to invent a story just to scare his mother between dishes and sunlight. And yet Araceli had been in this house not 10 minutes ago, her soft voice floating down like steam, her white blouse ghosting across the landing. I could almost see the glint of water in her hair right then. I could smell the jasmine. "Are you sure, Ivan?" I asked, though the question felt like asking whether fire was hot. It could be someone with the same name, or a photo that... He cut in, but not unkindly. The firmness in him reminded me of his father when a storm came and the roof complained. "Mom, I'm looking at her." His words slowed. "Right now." Just then, upstairs, the water stopped. The silence it left behind was thick enough to fold. I heard a bedroom door open with a soft suction of air. Then a voice traveled down the staircase, her voice familiar as prayer. "Mom, who is it?" My heart lurched so hard I was sure I could see it pulse in my blouse. Just a friend," I called, and forced my feet to move, away from the stairs, into the living room where the walls could hold me up. I closed the door softly and pressed the receiver tighter to my ear. "Ivan," I whispered, my throat suddenly dry. "I just heard her. She's here. She just finished showering." On the other end, the airport itself seemed to hold its breath with my son. When he spoke, the shape of his words had changed sharper, edged with something that might have been fear on my behalf. "Mom, it's not possible." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "She's in front of me on the plane." 1,000 tiny things inside me went quiet. For a moment, I had no language, just the throb of blood and the old clock counting out seconds that now felt like accusations. "I have to go," Ivan said, softer. "They're about to." The announcement swallowed him for a second. "I'll call you when we land. Please, lock the doors." We said goodbye, but the word didn't stick to anything. I hung up and nearly dropped the receiver. It bounced once on the cradle and settled with a clatter that sounded too loud in the bright room. I stood in the living room, listening. The house had gone very still. The light outside was the same, golden and forgiving. Inside, everything had a new edge. The rug fibers under my slippers felt like needles. The framed photographs on the wall, Stephen and Araceli on their wedding day, Matthew in his tiny striped pajamas the week he came home from the hospital, Ivan beaming the day he first put on his uniform tilted slightly in my vision, as if the wall had learned to breathe. I sank onto the couch because my legs remembered how. The cushion met me like an embrace I didn't deserve. If Araceli is here, then who is on that plane? And if the woman on the plane is Araceli, then who is in my house? The questions staggered each other like drunk men in an alley. I forced myself to breathe. In, like drawing a curtain. Out, like lowering a lamp. The bedroom door upstairs clicked. Steps light, unhurried moved across the hall and down the staircase. She appeared in the doorway to the kitchen first, then framed herself in the arch to the living room the way she always did, with that quick, careful smile that made her seem almost composed by hand. Araceli wore a light blue dress, fresh and simple. Her hair was damp, dark ropes drying into waves, not a smudge of makeup, not a crack in her voice. "Mom, I'm going to the market early today. Do you want me to get you any vegetables or anything?" It was a kindness she had done 100 times. It should have been another small stitch in the daily quilt. Instead, the question sounded like a test I hadn't studied for. I swallowed. "Tomatoes, please," I said, and my voice betrayed me too thin, too polite. My throat felt lined with dust. She nodded, that delicate nod I used to admire. "All right, I'll be quick," she said. She took the wicker basket from its hook, slipped her purse over her shoulder, and moved through the doorway. The screen door breathed open, then sighed shut. Through the window, I watched her cross the small square of sunlight, her figure crisp against the lemon tree, and disappear beyond the gate. The house exhaled with her. I didn't. I stayed on the couch and pressed my fingertips into the threads of the armrest until the pattern imprinted my skin. Ivan has no reason to lie. Araceli has no reason to be two women. And yet both realities had walked into my kitchen at once and taken chairs at my table. This is how doubt works. It doesn't announce itself like thunder. It sifts in like dust and, before you know it, coats everything you own. The ordinary became evidence. The harmless turned suspect. My mind, faithful mule that it is, began dragging me through the past recent weeks. Stray comments, a stitch dropped here or there that I never thought to pick up. There had been days when Araceli came back from the market, softer than sunlight, humming under her breath as she cooked, smelling of oranges. And there were days she returned with a storm stitched under her skin, snapping because the salt shaker was in the wrong place, because a spoon had been left facing the wrong way in the drawer. Young women are allowed moods, I had told myself, the way a gardener forgives a plant for leaning toward a different window. But under the bright kitchen light of this moment, those moods rearranged themselves and spelled something I didn't want to read. A memory rose, unwelcome and insistent. A grocery list a few months ago, Araceli at the table, writing with her right hand, her script straight and neat as train tracks. The next day, the same list, only now she was writing with her left hand, the letters looser, a little fussy, as if the pen weighed more. "Since when do you write with your other hand, honey?" I had asked, amused. She had laughed, tossed it off. "Just practicing, Mom." And I, foolish in my love, had nodded and let the question fold itself away where it couldn't bother anyone. Now it unfurled like a snake. The pendulum clock ticked, 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 insistent as a dripping faucet in a quiet house. Outside, the sun-brushed world rolled on. Somewhere, a neighbor's lawnmower hawed to life. Somewhere, a child shouted triumph at a game I couldn't see. Somewhere above the Atlantic, a plane lifted its nose into the sky with my son on it, and a woman who might be my daughter-in-law seated in first class beside a man who was not my son. I stood, suddenly certain I needed to move or I would turn to salt. I crossed the room to the wall of photographs. My finger found our wedding picture, Raphael and me in the churchyard, ivy spilling over stone. 10 years since the day a hospital room took him away from me, and still I half expected him to round the doorway when the house was quiet like this, to say my name in that low voice and make decisions that were taller than I am. "What do I do, Raph?" I whispered to his smile under glass. The front latch clicked. I turned, breath catching. The door swung open fast, and then, "Grandma!" A small comet streaked into the house, a backpack bouncing wildly. Matthew, my clever little rascal with the serious eyes and the habit of loving the world as if it were a puzzle designed just for him. The clock went on ticking, but the day had already changed its name. Matthew burst into the house, his hair damp with sweat from the Arizona sun, his cheeks glowing with the simple, untouchable joy of being 7 years old. His laughter tumbled through the hallway, bright and unguarded, the kind of sound that should have rinsed every trace of heaviness from the air. Children's voices are meant to purify silence. But today, instead of filling the room with light, his presence only made the shadows inside me grow deeper. He flung his backpack onto the couch, the straps twisting in mid-air before landing with a thud. Digging into his small pocket, he opened his fist wide, triumphant. "Grandma, look, I got a star today." A gold sticker gleamed on his palm, clinging to the skin like a tiny sundae. I smiled, but it was the kind of smile that trembles at the edges, the kind that fools no one if they stare too long. "That's wonderful, Matthew," I murmured, bending to kiss his forehead. His skin was warm, scented faintly of crayons and playground dust. For a moment, I wanted to drown in the simplicity of his world. "Where's Mom?" he asked, tugging at my sleeve with impatient fingers. "She went to the market," I answered automatically. The words fell from my lips before I could think, before I could remember the knot of contradictions already choking me. Market, passport, plane, France, cousin. Nothing matched, yet I gave him the version that would soothe him. Satisfied, he nodded and skipped down the hall, humming. His small feet slapped against the tile, vanishing into his room. A door clicked shut. I sat back down in the armchair, the fabric cool beneath my hands, and tried to steady my breath. Logic whispered that I was being paranoid, but paranoia thrives on the cracks left by love. It slips into the spaces where certainty used to live. I thought back to winter, to Stephen's office Christmas party. Araceli had dazzled the room in a red dress that clung like flame. Everyone adored her laughter, her poise. But when I went searching for her later, I found her in the parking lot, her coat hanging open against the chill, her voice urgent, low, pressed into a phone I couldn't see. When she noticed me, she snapped it shut with such precision it made me flinch. "Just a friend from college, Mom," she had said, flashing a smile too quick, too polished. And I, unwilling to probe, unwilling to suspect, had swallowed her words whole. Could that friend have been the same man Ivan saw on the plane? The possibility twisted inside me like wire. I shook my head, as if the movement itself could fling the thought away. I couldn't accuse a young woman of betrayal simply for having secrets. Secrets don't always mean treachery. But still, the story didn't add up anymore. The house grew quieter. The clock's ticking felt louder than my own breathing. Then from down the hall, Matthew's voice rose, singing softly to himself. The melody wavered, innocent, a thread of light in the gathering dusk. His song reminded me so much of Stephen as a boy, clear, unbroken, believing without question that the world was safe. I closed my eyes, clinging to the sound, wishing I could still believe the same. The phone on the table rang again. The sudden sound jolted me so hard my knitting needles clattered to the floor. I grabbed the receiver, my breath already ragged. "Mom, it's me, Stephen." Relief swept through me for a second, but it was fleeting. "How are you, sweetheart?" I asked, steadying my voice. "Fine. I just wanted to check if Araceli was home. She wasn't answering her phone." My throat dried. I glanced at the clock, at the front door that had closed behind her not long ago. "She went to the market, dear. She said she'd be back soon." A pause. Then Stephen's tone turned oddly cautious. "The market? That's strange. She told me this morning she had plans with her cousin." The floor beneath me seemed to tilt. "Her cousin? Which one?" "Lydia, I think. In Scottsdale. She said she'd be out most of the day." I forced a laugh, thin as glass. "Maybe she changed her mind. You know how women are, plans can shift." But inside me, something heavy shifted too. 3 different versions of Araceli's day were now stacked on top of each other, none of them aligning. Shower, market, cousin, France. "Anyway," Stephen said, oblivious, "I'll be late tonight. Don't wait up. Kiss Matthew for me." "I will," I whispered. We hung up, but his words hung heavier than the silence. I sat frozen, staring at the pictures again. Araceli's smile from her wedding day beamed at me, framed in silver. In that photo, she looked flawless, radiant skin, wide eyes, the happiness of a bride stepping into a life full of promise. But what if that smile had never belonged entirely to her? What if the woman I had trusted, the woman who tucked Matthew in and called me Mom, wasn't one but 2? Or worse, what if she had always been one woman with 2 faces? A shiver went through me. The air conditioning clicked on, but the chill it brought felt unnatural. I tried to distract myself with chores. The laundry needed folding, the floor needed sweeping, but every corner of the house felt changed, as though another presence had pressed fingerprints into the wallpaper. In the kitchen, I found Araceli's teacup still on the counter, lipstick marking the rim. The lipstick was coral, a shade I had never seen her wear before. She usually chose rose, soft and modest. Why the change? I opened the trash bin to toss a paper towel and froze. At the top of the pile was a crumpled receipt from a boutique downtown, not the market. The timestamp was today. My pulse quickened. I smoothed it out with shaking fingers. A silk scarf, ivory-colored, absurdly expensive. I had never seen it on her. The house felt suddenly hostile, as though walls themselves were keeping secrets. Footsteps outside light, quick. I turned toward the window. A woman walked past the gate carrying a basket. For a heartbeat, I thought it was Araceli. Same build, same dark hair, same confident stride. But when she turned her head, she was a stranger. My breath escaped in a gasp I couldn't swallow back. "Grandma?" Matthew's small voice called from the hallway. He rubbed his eyes, pajama shirt slightly crooked. "Are you okay? You look scared." I forced calm into my face. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Go wash your hands for dinner." He nodded and patted away, unconvinced but obedient. The minutes dragged. My heart replayed Ivan's whisper like a broken record. "She's in front of me on this plane." The image grew sharper the more I resisted it. Araceli in first class, leaning toward a man in a tailored suit, her smile different, private. I could almost hear her laugh, lower than the one she used at home. My son had no reason to lie. My eyes, however, had every reason to betray me. Love makes us blind. Fear makes us imagine. But what was happening now seemed to do both at once. I pressed my palms together and whispered into the empty kitchen. If you're really here, Araceli, then who is she? And if she's really there, then who are you? The house answered only with its old, familiar creaks, the sound of Matthew running water in the bathroom sink, and the ticking of the clock that would not stop. Evening draped itself over Phoenix slowly, like a shawl stitched with copper and violet. The desert sky stretched wide, blushing into bruises of orange before surrendering to indigo. From my window, I could see the first porch lights flicker on across the neighborhood, little sentinels against the dark. In the distance, a dog barked, restless, as if it sensed something lurking in the air. Inside, the house seemed heavier with each passing hour. The air conditioner rattled faintly, but the coolness did nothing to ease the sweat on my palms. Every familiar corner felt unfamiliar. Every shadow seemed to stretch further than it should. Matthew had eaten his dinner and curled up with a picture book, the lamplight making his lashes quiver. I tucked a blanket around him, kissed his head, and left his door ajar. His breathing soon settled into the rhythm of sleep. Only then did I allow my own fear to step out of the shadows. I returned to the kitchen. The receipt from the boutique still lay on the counter, smoothed flat by my trembling hand. My eyes traced the words again, ivory silk scarf. My mind betrayed me with an image. Araceli, or whoever she was, wearing it on the plane, tilting her head toward the rich man, her laugh curling like smoke. I shut my eyes. Number, I must not imagine what I cannot prove. But imagination has teeth. Once it bites, it won't let go. I rose and began pacing the hallway. My hand brushed the family portraits as if they might steady me. Stephen's graduation photo, Ivan with his pilot's badge, Araceli smiling beside Stephen, her hand resting lightly on his chest. My gaze snagged on her face. Was that smile truly hers, or had I never known how to read it? I whispered into the empty hall, "Who are you?" The house answered with silence. At 9:30, the phone rang again. My heart jolted. I snatched up the receiver, half hoping, half dreading Ivan's voice. But it was a stranger. A woman's voice, clipped and polite. "Is this the Brooks residence? This is Desert Cab Services. We're confirming a pickup today under the name Araceli Brooks, destination Phoenix International Airport." My grip on the receiver went slack. "What?" "Yes, ma'am," the woman repeated, consulting her notes. "Booked this morning, scheduled for 4:30 p.m. from your address." My knees buckled. I caught the edge of the counter. "No, there must be a mistake." "Apologies if so," she said briskly. "Have a good night." The line went dead. The silence that followed was unbearable. If Araceli had booked a cab from my house, then she must have planned to leave this very afternoon at the same time Ivan swore he saw her board his flight. Yet hadn't she stood right here, smiling, asking if I wanted tomatoes? Hadn't I watched her walk out the gate with her wicker basket? Two timelines were colliding in front of me. I turned toward the hallway. The front door stood closed, but suddenly it felt like a mouth sealed shut, hiding more than it should. I locked it, slid the chain across, then checked the back door twice. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the key. I moved to the living room and sank into the armchair, staring at the curtains as they swayed faintly with the hum of the vent. My ears strained at every creak. The house no longer felt like mine. It felt borrowed, as if I had wandered into someone else's story. A floorboard groaned upstairs. I froze. Matthew was asleep. Araceli had not returned. Stephen was at work. And yet the sound was distinct. A measured step, deliberate, as if someone was crossing the landing. I rose, pulse roaring in my ears. My fingers brushed the phone on the side table. Should I call Stephen? Ivan? The police? But what could I even say? That my daughter-in-law is both here and not here? That she is two women in one body or one body in two places? That the house itself seems to lie? The step came again, then stopped. Silence thickened. I whispered my husband's name like a prayer. Raphael, help me. The clock struck 10, its chimes echoing like warnings. And then, from upstairs, a voice floated down, gentle, sweet, and horribly familiar. Mom, are you still awake? I staggered back against the wall, my breath shattering in my chest, because Ivan's words still echoed in my mind, hard as iron. She's in front of me on this plane. He hugged me tightly, saying in his little chirping voice, Grandma, the teacher, complimented me today because I drew so well. I stroked his head, trying to smile, but I still felt a weight in my chest. Matthew sat down and pulled out his notebook to show me. Grandma, look! Yesterday my mom helped me with my homework with her right hand, and her writing was so pretty. But today, she wrote with her left, and it came out uglier. The boy pointed to 2 pages in the notebook, one with well-formed letters and the other with crooked ones. I looked at the handwriting, and my heart sank. Your mom must have been busy today. She was probably tired. That's why she wrote like that, I said, trying to hide my confusion. But Matthew looked up with his innocent eyes. Grandma, my mom is so weird. Some days, she hugs me, really, really tight, but other days she doesn't even look at me. My grandson's words were another stab. I hugged him, trying to comfort him, but, in my head, everything was starting to get tangled up. Just then, the doorbell rang. I got up, opened the door, and saw Mrs. Collins, my good neighbor, standing there with the plate that Araceli had taken to her the day before. She smiled, with her usual kind smile, but there was curiosity in her eyes. Stella, your daughter-in-law is so nice, but yesterday I noticed she gave me the plate with her left hand, and you told me she's a righty, right? That's strange. Or maybe she uses both hands. I forced a smile and replied, Maybe so, Helen. Do you want to come in for some tea? She nodded and came in, but her comment was like a thorn stuck in me. It wasn't just me. Even the neighbors had noticed the difference. I served her tea and we talked about this and that. But as soon as she left, I sank onto the couch with my hand on my chest. I felt frozen, as if the world was falling down on me. That afternoon, I went out into the garden with the watering can, trying to let the water fall gently on the daisies I had cared for years. The sun was starting to set. The shadows of the trees stretched across the yard, but my soul could not find peace. The words of Matthew, of Mrs. Collins, and Ivan's firm voice on the phone kept circling in my head like pebbles thrown into a calm lake, creating ripples that wouldn't stop. I was watering the plants, but my mind wasn't there. I asked myself, am I? I'm too old now to notice the strange things happening in my own house, or have it's been turning a blind eye on purpose, wanting to believe in the happy family I always dreamed of? Araceli returned from the market carrying her wicker basket, but what caught my attention was that she was holding it with her left hand. I remembered perfectly that Araceli always used her right hand, from how she held the knife to chop vegetables to how she combed Matthew's hair. I stood there watching her put the basket on the kitchen table, and I asked her in a low voice, What did you buy, Araceli? My voice tried to sound natural, but inside a wave of suspicion was growing. She smiled and replied very politely, I got some tomatoes, cilantro, and fresh fish. Mom, I'm going to make the roasted fish you like so much tonight. Does that sound good? Her voice was soft as always, but I couldn't help but notice her hands. The left one? No, the right. At one. I nodded and turned away, pretending to clean the table, but my heart was pounding hard. Was I imagining things, or were these small details trying to tell me something? At dinner time, the whole family gathered at a table. Stephen was tired after a long day at work, but he still smiled at Matthew and asked him how school had been. Araceli ate slowly, delicately, and even turned to Stephen to remind him, Honey, the parent-teacher conference is next week, so be sure to take the day off. I looked at her, trying to find the daughter-in-law I was so proud of. But in my head, Ivan's voice kept echoing. She's sitting in first class next to a man. I bit my lip, trying to swallow the connotos. Anguish. but it felt like a stone stuck in my throat. Just 3 days later, everything was different. Matthew dropped a glass of water during dinner, and the water splashed all over this tablecloth. I quickly grabbed a rag to clean it, laughing, "It's okay, honey, just be more careful." But Araceli, sitting across from him, suddenly frowned and said in a sharp voice, "Matthew, why are you so clumsy? Be more careful." I was stunned looking at Stephen. He also frowned and said in a low voice, "Araceli, it was an accident. That's all." She turned with a spark of anger in her eyes. "You always defend him, and I end up looking like the bad guy in the house." The atmosphere at the table became heavy. Matthew lowered his head, his eyes full of tears. I hugged him, feeling a deep pain. Only a few days ago, Araceli had lovingly reminded him about school, and now she seemed like a completely different person. I sat next to her, watching in silence, trying to put the pieces together in my head. Today, she was irritable. The other day, she was so sweet. Today, she used her left hand. The other day, her right. These small differences, one by one, were piling up in my mind like the pieces of a puzzle I still couldn't see completely. I told myself I had to calm down, but every time I looked at Araceli, I saw a stranger, as if she wasn't the daughter-in-law I had lived with for so many years. A few days later, I took Matthew to school. He held my hand as we walked down the same old cobblestone street. Suddenly, he stopped, looked at me, and said in a sad voice, "Grandma, yesterday my mom taught me how to write, and she was so patient. Her handwriting was so pretty, but today she didn't even want to look at my homework. She told me to do it by myself." I knelt down to look into his clear eyes, and I felt my heart break. "Your mom was busy, honey. Don't be sad," I said, but my voice trembled. Matthew nodded, but his gaze was still full of disappointment. I hugged him, feeling a huge sense of powerlessness. He's only 7. How was he supposed to understand? Something that I myself couldn't figure out? That night, we sat down to dinner again. Suddenly, Araceli took a small notebook out of her bag and started writing something with her left hand. Stephen, who was serving himself food, laughed suddenly. "Hey, since when do you write with your left hand? It looks so strange." Araceli stopped dead with a forced smile on her lips. "Oh, just experimenting, honey," she quickly put the notebook away in her bag, but I noticed a flash of panic in her eyes. Stephen shook his head and didn't say anything else, but I knew he had also noticed something strange. I stayed, seated there, gripping my spoon, trying to keep a straight face, but inside the doubts were growing like a slow fire. One morning, I took an empty spice jar and crossed the same old cobblestone street to go to Mrs. Collins' house. Araceli had borrowed it a few weeks ago, saying it was for making the chili she liked so much. I knocked on the door, and Mrs. Collins opened it with her usual kind smile. "Stella, come in. Let me make you some coffee," she said, a rag still in her hand. I gave her the jar, thinking of thanking her and leaving, but she pulled me to sit in a wooden chair in her kitchen. The atmosphere was warm. It smelled of roasted coffee, but I couldn't relax. Mrs. Collins looked at me with eyes full of doubt and lowered her voice. "Stella, please don't get mad at what I'm about to say. Has your daughter-in-law's personality changed? One day, she greets me so happily and even asks about my kids. But yesterday, she passed by here. I waved at her, and she didn't even acknowledge me, as if she didn't know me." Mrs. Collins's words were another stone in the troubled lake of my heart. I forced a smile and replied, "She must have been in a hurry, Helen. You know how young people are these days." But inside, I was a mess. I knew Mrs. Collins wasn't just talking to talk. She's a very sensitive person who always pays attention to details. If even she noticed how strange Araceli was, then my suspicions weren't just my imagination anymore. I stayed for a little while, longer, took a sip of the now cold coffee, and said goodbye. My heart heavy. On my way back, I passed by Mr. Johnson's bakery, where I always bought sweet bread for Matthew. Mr. Johnson was at the counter, and when he saw me, he smiled. Mrs. Brooks, what can I get for the little champ today? I asked for some pastries, and he suddenly asked, "You're Stephen's mom, right?" His wife came in the other day. So nice. She even told me how delicious my bread was. But this morning she came back with a scowl on her face. She bought the bread and didn't even say thank you. She just left. I froze, gripping the handle of my purse. "She must have been tired, Joe," I replied, my voice trembling. I thanked him quickly and left. Mr. Johnson's words were another knife, cutting deeper into the doubts that were growing inside me. When I got home, I made myself some tea and sat on the porch. The wind blew softly, carrying the scent of the daisies from the garden. I looked toward the street that led to the market where Araceli always walked. Suddenly, I saw her returning, carrying her shopping bag, but she greeted me in a dry voice. "Good afternoon, Mom." No smile, no happiness, like yesterday when she bragged about getting a good deal on the cilantro. I nodded and replied in a low voice, "You're back already." But inside, I couldn't help but observe her more closely. The blouse she was wearing today was navy blue, different from the white blouse she had on when she left. I tried to ask her in a soft voice, "Why did you change your blouse?" Araceli paused for a second and then quickly replied, "Oh, I got a stain on it and had to change." She smiled halfway and hurried into the kitchen. I stayed there with the teacup in my hands, feeling as if a rock was crushing my chest. The words of Mrs. Collins, of Mr. Johnson, and the way Araceli replied to me, everything forced me to stop ignoring things. That night we were all having dinner. Matthew was talking about school with his cheerful little voice, but I noticed that Araceli only nodded without answering him, unlike other times. When Stephen asked, "Are you done eating so? Your mom can clear the plates?" Matthew suddenly turned to me and said innocently, "Grandma, oh, my mom didn't sing to me to sleep. But yesterday she did sing that song, Quito Lindo. You always sing to me, and it sounded so beautiful." I looked at Araceli, who was serving herself food without reacting. But Matthew's words were like a needle in my heart. That lullaby, that Solito Lindo that I used to sing to Stephen and Yvonne, only Araceli and I knew it in this house. So why did she sing it yesterday and not today? Why did she change so quickly? I got up to clear the plates, but my mind was no longer there. I remembered the times Arai would leave the house saying she was going to see a friend, but would return with a strange look. One day she brought a bouquet of fresh flowers, saying a friend had given them to her. But another day she got angry when I asked her, "Where did you go today that I've got home so late? I used to think these were unimportant things, but now they seemed like the pieces of a much bigger secret." I didn't want to believe that Araceli was hiding something from me, but every word, every gesture of hers made me doubt. That night, after cleaning the kitchen, I sat at the dining room table and took an old notebook out of a drawer. My hand was shaking as I wrote the first line. 3:00 p.m. Araceli leaves for the market, returns 6 p.m. wearing a blue blouse. Irritable attitude. I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending that nothing was happening. I kept writing. Yesterday, she sang to Matthew to sleep, tender. Today, she was cold, didn't sing. Each word was a heavy stroke, as if I was engraving my suspicions into reality. My old notebook was now full of notes about Araceli. Every line was a piece of my doubt, as if I was painting a picture I didn't dare to look at. I sat in the kitchen, looking at the notebook with a heavy heart. I couldn't keep all these thoughts to myself anymore. They were like waves rising and falling, leaving me alone in my confusion. I needed someone to talk to, someone who would understand me, who wouldn't judge me, who wouldn't jump to conclusions. I immediately thought of Carol, my best friend, who has been with me since we were young when we used to sit and knit under a tree and tell each other our lives. I picked up the phone, my voice trembling. "Carol, are you free this afternoon? Let's go to the coffee shop on the corner. I need to talk." Carol accepted. Instantly, her voice as warm as ever. "Stella, I knew something was wrong. Wait, For me, I'm on my way. I felt a little relief, but the worry was still weighing me down. I put on my old shawl and left the house for the Dom, small coffee shop on the corner where Carol and I had shared so many joys and sorrows. The place was the same, with its dark wooden tables and that delicious smell of freshly roasted coffee. I chose a table in a corner where the light was dim so no one would hear our conversation. I sat there, hugging the woad, hot coffee cup, but with my soul cold. I wondered how I was going to tell her about all these suspicions. How was I? I'm going to dare to admit that I was doubting my own daughter-in-law. Carol arrived wearing a light sweater and carrying a bag of fresh vegetables. She sat down and looked me straight in the eyes with that sharp but affectionate gaze. "Stella, just looking at your face, I know something big is wrong. Come on, let it out. What's got you so worried?" I took a deep breath, trying not to let my voice break, but every word got stuck in my throat. I told her everything in a summary. Ivan's call from the airport, Araceli's passport, the woman identical to her on the plane, and all the small details I had written down, from how she changed hands to right to her mood changing from day to night. I took the notebook out of my bag and handed it to her. "Look, I wrote it all down here. I don't know if I'm imagining it, but I can't be. It's a fool anymore." Carol flipped through the pages with a frown. She read my shaky handwriting. Slowly. "You've noticed everything, Stella," she said in a serious voice. "Every time she leaves and comes back, it's like she's another person. What do you think it is?" I shook my head, gripping the coffee cup. "I don't know, Carol. I just know I'm scared. Scared that Araceli is hiding something. Scared that my family will break apart if I dig any deeper. But I can't stop. I have to know the truth. For Stephen, for Matthew." Carol put her cup on the table and looked at me with determination. "You can't fool a woman easily, Stella. What does your gut tell you? I'm sure there's something shady going on here. You have to get to the bottom of this." I hesitated and my voice became a whisper. "But what if I'm misjudging her? What if I hurt Stephen?" Carol interrupted me firmly. "Trust your gut. If you don't find out the truth, you'll always live with the doubt, and you won't be able to protect Matthew or Stephen." Just then, Mrs. Jenkins, the lady who sells vegetables at the market and whom I know, came into the coffee shop. She recognized me and smiled. "Mrs. Brooks, what a coincidence. Last week, I saw your daughter-in-law at the market. She was so kind. She even bought an extra bunch of cilantro to cook with. But this morning, she came by again looking so serious. She didn't even say hello. She bought her vegetables and left." "Is something wrong with your daughter-in-law?" I forced a smile and replied, "She must be tired, Marie." But inside, I felt like I was drowning. Another person who noticed how strange Ari was. I thanked Mrs. Jenkins, watched her leave, and turned back to Carol. Panic reflected in my eyes. Carol took my hand and her voice softened. "See, Stella, it's not just you. Even the neighbors notice. Don't lie to yourself anymore. Keep writing everything down, and if you have to, you're going to have to follow her. Not to hurt her, but to protect your family." I nodded, but my heart sank. I knew Carol was right, but the idea of following my own daughter-in-law made me feel as if I was betraying my family. I had spent my whole life taking care of this home, and now I had to do something I never imagined: investigate one of my own. That afternoon I returned home, my head still a mess. Araceli left the house, carrying her familiar red basket. "Mom, I'm going to the market for a bit," she said in a soft voice. I nodded, but as soon as she disappeared behind the gate, I opened my notebook and wrote 3:00 p.m. Araceli leaves for the market carrying a red basket. Normal attitude. I stayed there watching the clock, counting every minute. At 6, Araceli returned, but the basket she was holding in her hand was now blue. I was surprised and asked her, "Did you switch baskets?" She smiled and quickly replied, "Yes, the other one broke and a friend lent me this one." I nodded, but my hands were shaking as I added to the notebook. Returned 6 p.m. Carrying a blue basket, voice a little rushed. My notes were piling up. Each line was one step closer to the truth, but also one step away from the image of the old mother who only knows how to love and trust. On the weekend, Stephen left for overtime work early, and Matthew was at a school activity, leaving the house quiet, just for Eerie and me. I was cleaning the dining room table, trying to keep myself busy to ward off the doubts that were eating at me. But then, Araceli came down from her room in a pale yellow floral dress, looking as fresh as she did in her first days of marriage. "Mom, I'm going to the market for a bit," she said in a soft voice. She took her usual wicker basket and left. I nodded, smiling, but inside a voice insisted, "Follow her, Stella. Go find the truth." I didn't think twice. I took my old shawl, put it over my head to cover my face a little, and left the house in silence, keeping a safe distance behind Araceli. The sun was hot, sweat was soaking my back, but I didn't care. I just wanted to know where she was really going, what she was doing. Araceli walked quickly down the cobblestone street that led to the market. But suddenly, instead of turning, right as always, she turned left into an alley behind a working-class neighborhood. The houses were old, crammed against each other with peeling paint and rusty tin roofs. I slowed down, my heart pounding, trying to hide behind some bicycles parked on the sidewalk. Araceli didn't look back. She kept walking. She went into an even narrower alley where the sunlight barely reached. I hid behind a mechanic's shop where a man was concentrating on tightening nuts. I saw Araceli stop in front of an old wooden door, knock softly, and then go in and disappear. I stood there, my breathing ragged, my head spinning. What was my daughter-in-law doing there? This wasn't the market or any of the friends' houses she had mentioned. I wanted to walk over, knock on the door, and ask her directly, but my feet seemed to be nailed to the ground. I was afraid of the truth, afraid that what I was about to discover would break everything. In the end, I turned around and went back home, full of questions, each step heavier than the last. I had barely pushed the gate open when I froze. Araceli was standing in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with a white blouse. It's on, completely different from the floral dress she had left in. She was frowning and looked at me with cold, sharp eyes. "Where did you go, Mom? That you're just getting back?" I stood frozen, my mouth dry, unable to say a word. Only a few minutes ago, I had seen her go into that alley in a yellow dress. How could she? I have gotten back so quickly. "And this blouse?" I stammered. I just went for a walk, that's all." Araceli nodded without saying anything else, but her gaze sent a shiver down my spine. I went up to my room pretending to look for something, but in reality, it was to escape that look, to calm my heart that was pounding wildly in my chest. That night, I was sitting knitting when Matthew ran into my room, his cheeks red from playing in the yard. He hugged my legs, sobbing. "Grandma," my mom yelled at me just because I dropped a pencil. Not like yesterday. Yesterday, she was so nice, she even hugged me. I took Matthew in my arms, stroked his head, but inside I felt like I was burning. "Your mom was tired, honey. Don't be sad," I said, but my voice trembled. Matthew hid his dowling face in my shoulder and whispered, "Grandma, I want the mom from yesterday." I hugged him tighter, tears about to fall. My grandson's words were like a knife, engraving my suspicions even deeper. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The images repeated over and over in my head. Araceli in the floral dress going into the alley. Araceli in the white blouse, standing in the kitchen. And Ivan's voice, "She's on my flight." I took the notebook out of the drawer and wrote a sentence. I didn't even dare to believe myself. Maybe they are not the same person. That sentence felt like a curse and made me tremble. The next morning, I decided to go back to that alley. I couldn't bear the doubt anymore. I took the family photo that hangs in the living room, the one where Araceli smiles radiantly next to Stephen and Matthew. I held it tight and left the house, determined but terrified. The alley was the same as yesterday, silent and somber. I stopped next to a corn stand where a middle-aged woman was fanning the charcoal. I showed her the photo and asked, "Excuse me, have you seen this young woman around here?" The woman looked at it closely and then pointed. "Oh yes, of course. She comes and goes often from the house at number 14, that one over there." I thanked her, my heart pounding in my throat, and walked straight to that house. The house at number 14 appeared in front of me, with stained walls, a peeling wooden door, and a pot with a wilted daisy on the window frame. I stood there, my hands trembling, feeling that the whole world was holding its breath with me. I knocked on the door, and each knock sounded like a hammer blow to my chest. The door opened, and I was speechless. In front of me was a woman identical to Araceli, from her face to her body to her long black hair. The only difference was her frightened look and her hands that were shaking as she held a rag. I stammered, my voice breaking. "Araceli," the young woman started, gripped the rag tightly, and tried to slam the door shut. But just then, another voice was heard from inside, a soft but firm voice. "Isidora, don't hide anymore. You know this is wrong too." I looked up and saw a young woman come out of a corner of the room, standing right behind the woman who looked just like Araceli. She was thin, with her hair in a bun, and had an intelligent but kind look. She looked at me and smiled slightly. "My name is Lucy Miller, Isidora's roommate, Mrs. Brooks. Please come in. It's time you knew the truth." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my legs from trembling, and went into that small tin-roofed house. The walls were stained, the concrete floor was cracked, and a faint smell of disinfectant hung in the air. In a corner, an old man coughed weakly, lying on an old cot covered with a frayed blanket. I felt the space crushing me, but I still walked and sat down in the wooden chair that Lucy pointed to. The woman, identical to Araceli, lowered her face, and her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry, I'm not Araceli. My name is Isidora." I looked at her, my mind a whirlwind, unable to say anything. Isidora. The name was strange, but the face was too familiar. I clasped my hands, trying to keep my voice firm. "You explain to me why you look so much like my daughter-in-law and why you show up at my house." Isidora looked up, her eyes full of guilt, but she didn't answer immediately. Instead, Lucy sat down next to her, poured a glass of water from an old plastic jug, and began to speak. "Isidora is very poor, Mrs. Brooks," Lucy said in a calm, clear voice. "Her adopted parents are very ill, especially the gentleman lying down there. A few years ago, Isidora met Araceli by chance at a market. They looked like two peas in a pod, and Araceli took advantage of that. She proposed that Isidora pretend to be her, that she replace her for a Braddock, a few hours whenever she needed to. Isidora didn't want to, but Araceli paid her very well, and her family needed the money for medicine. I looked at Isidora and saw that her head was bowed, gripping the rag so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "Replace her for what?" I pressed, my voice full of disbelief. Why would Araceli need someone to pretend to be her? Isidora looked up, her voice trembling. "I don't know everything, ma'am. She would just tell me. You just stay in the house for a few hours, do some things like go to the market, take care of the boy, and then she would give me money, a lot of money. Enough to buy my parents' medicine. I didn't dare to ask for more." She lowered her head, and tears began to roll down her cheeks. I looked at her, my chest feeling tight. Every strange detail from the last few months suddenly made sense. The change of hands for writing, the personality that was sometimes sweet and sometimes sour, the voice that was sometimes gentle and sometimes cold. Everything fit now, like the last pieces of a puzzle I had refused to see. Lucy continued with a sharper look. "I don't know if this helps, but once I saw Araceli with a very elegant man. His name is Charles Thompson. I heard the name when they were talking at a coffee shop. They were calling each other honey very affectionately. At that moment, Isidora was waiting outside in the car, not understanding anything. The name Charles Thompson was like a knife in my heart. I remembered Ivan's words. She's sitting in first class next to a rich man. The small room seemed to spin around me. I tried to stay calm, but my hands were shaking so much that I knocked over the glass of water. Lucy rushed to clean it up, but I just shook my head. My voice choked. She, Araceli, is deceiving my family. Isidora broke down, her voice choked with sobs. I'm so sorry, ma'am. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I just wanted to save my parents. I looked at this young woman with a face identical to Araceli's, but with a look full of pain and regret. I wanted to get angry. I wanted to scream. But seeing Isidora, I only felt pity. She wasn't the mastermind. She was just a piece in Araceli's game. Everything was falling apart in front of my eyes. I got up, trying to make my voice sound firm. Isidora, do you know where Araceli is? Do you know what she does when she asks you to pretend to be her? Isidora shook, her head still crying. I don't know, ma'am. She would just tell me to do what she asked and that she would pay me. I didn't dare to ask for more. Lucy put a hand on her shoulder to comfort her and then addressed me. Mrs. Brooks, I know this is very painful for you, but Isidora is also a victim. I have another choice. I looked around the humble house, hearing the weak voice of the man on the cot. I understood Isidora's desperation, but that didn't erase the feeling of betrayal I felt. I clenched my fists, trying to hold back the tears. I don't blame you, Isidora, but I need to know the truth. I need to protect my son and my grandson. I got up, feeling that the world was collapsing on me. Thank you, Lucy, for telling me the truth. I'll be back. I left the house, and the bright sun outside blinded me, but my heart was cold. The next morning, I went back to that small alley where the stained walls and the peeling wooden door had become an obsession in my mind. The sun was still hot, but I felt a coldness inside, as if I was carrying a cold wind of unresolved doubts. I knocked on the door of number 14, gripping the family photo as if it were an amulet that would give me the courage to face the truth. This time, Isidora didn't seem so scared. She opened the door with a still shy but calmer look and invited me in. Mrs. Brooks, I was expecting you. Please come in. The house was still small with that smell of disinfectant and the weak cough of the man on the cot. I sat in the old wooden chair and looked at Isidora. He was wearing a simple blouse, her hair in a loose bun. She looked tired but no longer frightened. I took a deep breath and said in a low voice, Isidora, I want to meet your adoptive mom. I need to understand all of this better. Isidora nodded and led me to a corner of the room where a very thin woman with completely white hair was lying in bed, her cloudy eyes staring at the ceiling. She was Mrs. Jones, Isidora's adoptive mother. I took her frail hand and introduced myself. I'm Stella Brooks, Stephen's mom, Araceli's husband. Mrs. Jones looked at me, breathing with difficulty, and said in a weak voice, Isidora is not my blood. She's a child. I adopted when she was a newborn. Her words were like a hammer blow to my head. I froze, my heart beating faster, but I tried to make my voice sound calm. Please tell me how it all happened. The lady coughed, and then slowly began to tell me a story I wasn't prepared for. Many years ago, I was a nurse at a hospital in a small town, she began, her voice trembling. A very poor family had twins. They were so poor they couldn't keep both of them. The mom was crying. She said she could only keep one. The other one they were going to abandon. My heart broke. I couldn't let them abandon that baby. So I adopted her. That's Isidora. She stopped for a long cough and then looked at Isidora with immense love. I raised her as if she were my own, but I know she has always wanted to find her real parents. I have nothing to give her but my love and this house. I sat there, gripping the edge of the chair, my head spinning. Do you know who Isidora's biological parents are? I asked, my voice trembling. Mrs. Jones shook her head. I only know they were abroad. Poor family from a nearby town. I didn't ask much. I just wanted to save the child. I looked at Isidora and saw her with her face bowed, tears rolling down. Mrs. Brooks, I don't know anything about my biological parents, she said, her voice choked. But when I met Araceli, I thought maybe she knew something. She looks so much like me, but she never told me anything about that. I felt a lack of air. I asked Mrs. Jones to let me see her old papers, hoping to find a clue. She pointed to an old wooden dresser. Isidora took out a yellowish paper envelope and gave it to me. Inside, there was a copy of some hospital papers with Isidora's date of birth. I read them quickly and felt my heart stop. Isidora's date of birth was exactly the same as Araceli's, the one I had seen on her papers when she married Stephen. I gripped the documents with trembling hands and looked at Isidora. You and Araceli could be twin sisters, I said, my voice lost. Isidora broke down, crying, covering her face. So Ari is my sister. Why didn't she tell me anything? Why did she make me do all that? I looked at her, my heart shattered. I remembered the days when Araceli came to my house, radiant and confident, as if she had been born to be the perfect wife and mother. I had loved her. I had believed she would give Stephen happiness, but now I knew that. She had not only deceived my family, but she had also taken advantage of her own sister, using her as a double to hide secrets I didn't even dare to imagine. I stood up, put my hand on Isidora's shoulder, and my voice, though firm, could not hide the pain. Isidora, from today on, I won't let anyone else take advantage of you. I'm going to help your parents with their illness. But in return, you have to cooperate with me. I need to bring this truth to light for Stephen, for Matthew. Isidora nodded, still crying. I will help you. I don't want to live in this lie anymore. I looked at her and saw sincerity in her eyes, and for the first time I felt a ray of hope in the middle of the storm. I left the house and walked through the alley, my soul in turmoil. I passed by the bustling market where people were shopping and laughing. But in my mind, Mrs. Jones's words echoed like bells. 2 twins, one abandoned, the other raised, and now their destinies had crossed in my own family. I returned home, my soul a mess, like a field after a storm. The truth about Araceli and Isidora, the secret of the twins, was a rock crushing my chest. I was at a crossroads for which I was not prepared. To confront my daughter-in-law, the woman who had deceived us all, and to reveal the truth to Stephen and Matthew. That night, I called Ivan. My voice was firm, though my heart was trembling. Ivan, you have to come home tomorrow night. There are some things I need you to clarify. Ivan was surprised. I could hear the worry in his voice. Mom, did something serious happen? I said bluntly. You just come, honey. I need you. And if you can bring Araceli's electronic passport. He didn't ask any more questions. He just said, yes, Mom, I'll be there. I hung up and sat down, feeling that the whole world was crashing down on me. I knew that tomorrow night would be one that no one in this family would ever forget. The next day, I got up early and prepared a big family dinner. I put a white tablecloth on the table, lit some candles. I cooked the chili that Stephen likes so much and the roasted fish that Matthew always asks for. I wanted this dinner to be special, not to celebrate, but to mark a before and after. I was in the kitchen chopping vegetables, but my mind was somewhere else between that dark alley and Isidora's words. I told myself I had to be strong for Stephen, for Matthew, but each cut of the knife felt like a cut in my own heart. Stephen got home as it was starting to get dark, tired from work. Seeing the table set, he was surprised. What are we celebrating? Why did you make so much food, Mom? I smiled, trying to seem calm. I just wanted all of us to have a nice dinner. Sit down, honey. Araceli came in with her light blue dress, a soft smile, but a bit of nervousness in her eyes. The smell of grilled fish drifted warmly through the kitchen, delicate and rich, a fragrance that normally would have promised comfort. Tonight, though, it felt heavier, almost like a veil stretched over something none of us wanted to face. "Grandma, the fish smells so good." Matthew's voice rang out as he ran to me, wrapping his small arms tight around my legs. His laughter carried innocence, but when I touched his head and stroked his soft hair, a lump rose in my throat. I knew, oh how I knew, that after tonight, that innocence might never be so carefree again. We gathered around the table. At first, the atmosphere almost fooled me. Stephen spoke about work, his words clipped but steady, trying to pull normalcy back into the room. Matthew, proud as ever, waved his drawing from school, explaining every bright crayon line with unstoppable enthusiasm. Araceli smiled faintly and nodded when spoken to, offering soft comments here and there. But my eyes, sharper now from days of doubt, saw what others tried to ignore. Her hand shook ever so slightly when she lifted her spoon. The tremor was small, almost invisible, but it betrayed her calm mask. I stared at her fingers, white against the silver, and I realized that every secret leaves its trace even when we think we're hiding perfectly. I drew a long breath, steadying myself. My pulse thundered in my ears. Then, with a look that only Ivan would understand, I tilted my head toward the door. The front door opened slowly. Ivan stepped inside, shoulders squared, his pilot's uniform lending him an air of unshakable authority. Behind him came Isidora, the woman I had discovered in that alley, the face I had feared and prayed about. She wore a simple dress, nothing elaborate, but her presence was like a lightning bolt through the room. Identical features to Araceli, identical smile, identical eyes, but her expression carried something raw anguish, guilt, and perhaps a desperate longing for truth. The air collapsed into silence. Spoons stilled, chairs creaked as everyone instinctively shifted. Matthew's eyes went wide, darting from one woman to the other. He blinked, confused, his young mind trying to reconcile the impossible. Finally, he asked the question that none of us adults dared to voice. "Why are there two moms?" His voice was so pure, so bewildered, that it cut deeper than any accusation could have. Stephen's face drained of color. The spoon slipped from his hand and clattered against the plate. He looked at his wife, then at the woman standing in the doorway, his mouth opening but no sound coming out. Araceli shot to her feet, her chair scraping violently against the floor. Her voice rose, brittle and defensive, anger barely masking terror. "What is this? What are you trying to do, Mom? What is this supposed to mean?" I stood slowly, gripping the edge of the table so tightly that my knuckles whitened. My legs trembled, but my voice, when it came, was firm, deliberate, unshakable. "Sit down, Araceli." The room seemed to shrink, every eye fixed on me, every breath held. I had spent weeks drowning in uncertainty, but tonight I would no longer be silent. Tonight, I would speak every word that had been carving itself into my chest. We need to clear everything up, now. The weight of my own words pressed down on me, but I forced myself to hold Araceli's gaze. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her eyes darting from me to Isidora as if searching for an escape. "Do you want to know what this is about?" I said, my voice low, deliberate. "Then listen carefully, because tonight I am done being silent." I began with Ivan's phone call. The room seemed to lean toward me as I spoke, every syllable slicing through the stale silence. "The night Ivan called me from the airport, he told me something that should have been impossible. He saw you boarding a flight to France. He held your passport in his own hands. But at that same moment, you were here, in my house, taking a shower." Stephen's mouth parted, disbelief written across his face. Matthew stared at me wide-eyed, his little chest heaving as though the story itself frightened him. Araceli's lips tightened. "He was mistaken," she spat. "Airports are chaotic. He must have confused someone else with me." But I pressed forward, relentless. "Mistaken? Then what about the times I saw you write with one hand one day and the other the next? Right hand neat as a schoolteacher, left hand crooked and strange. You laughed it off, said you were practicing. But no, those were two different women." Isidora lowered her head, shame flooding her features, but she did not speak. "And your moods, Araceli," I continued, my voice trembling with both fury and sorrow. "One day you were sweetness itself, singing Matthew to sleep, filling the house with warmth. The next, you were cruel over the smallest things, snapping at me, snapping at Stephen, frightening your own son. I told myself it was stress, the moods of a young mother, but now I see it clearly. It wasn't just mood swings, it was two different hearts beating under the same face. The room shivered with tension, the clock ticked, relentless. I turned to the woman by the door, the one whose eyes brimmed with anguish. That day in the alley I found you, Isidora. I learned the truth you tried to bury. You and Araceli are twin sisters. She has used you, forced you to play her double, to hide her lies, to deceive us all. Gasps broke the air. Stephen's face collapsed into shock, his knuckles pressed white against the edge of the table. Matthew looked from one to the other, confusion turning to tears at the corners of his eyes. Araceli's voice cracked into a shout, raw with desperation. She's making it all up. She wants to humiliate me in front of my family. How dare you, Mom? How dare you? Before I could answer, Ivan stepped forward. His eyes were hard, his jaw set like stone. From his bag, he pulled a small folder and dropped it onto the table with a heavy thud. Papers slid across the wood. "This is your electronic passport, Araceli," he said, each word a blade. "With entry and exit stamps from France. You can't sit in this dining room and fly across the ocean at the same time. The evidence is here. Stop lying." Araceli's eyes flicked to the documents. Her lips quivered, pressed into a thin line. For the first time, she could not conjure a reply. Then, from the smallest voice at the table, came the cruelest truth. "It's true, Grandma," Matthew whispered, his eyes glistening. "Some days my mom is an angel, but other days she's really mean. I don't like the mean mom." His words pierced the air like a knife. Stephen's hand trembled. My heart cracked so deeply I thought it might not hold me upright. I wanted to reach for my grandson, to shield him, but my legs felt like stone. And then, the back door creaked open. Lucy, the neighbor who had been a silent witness to far more than I realized, stepped inside. Her sharp eyes swept the table. "I saw her," Lucy said firmly, pointing at Araceli. "I saw you with Charles Thompson, calling each other honey, and it was you who hired Isidora to pretend to be you, to trick this family into believing your lies." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Stephen turned, his eyes bloodshot, his voice strangled. "Is it true, Araceli? Tell me. Is it true?" The walls themselves seemed to lean in, waiting. Araceli clenched her fists, her chest rising and falling like a storm contained in flesh. For a long, unbearable moment, she said nothing. Then, with a sudden fury, she slammed her hands onto the table. "Yes, it's true," she screamed. Her voice cracked the air, raw and venomous. "I have a lover. I'm sick of this poor life. I'm sick of being the obedient daughter-in-law in this suffocating house. Charles gives me a life 100 times better than this. And you, Stephen, you're good for nothing." The room exploded into silence so sharp it hurt. Matthew burst into tears and ran to me, burying his face in my lap. Stephen sat frozen, fists clenched so tight the blood drained from them. And my whole body shook as I tried to cradle my grandson, as if holding him could shield him from the words that had already pierced his heart. Across the table, Araceli stood like a stranger, her eyes cold, her face drained of remorse. Araceli's confession still echoed in the room, hanging like smoke after a fire. The words she spat had the weight of bombs: lover, suffocating, good for nothing. Each one landed with a force that rattled the foundation of this home. Stephen's face twisted, pale and stricken, his fists unclenched, then clenched again, trembling so violently I feared he might strike the table in two. He stared at her with a mixture of disbelief and devastation. "Araceli, do you really think that of me? Of us?" His voice cracked, choked by pain. But she didn't answer. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she turned her gaze away, as if the family she had built her life upon no longer deserved her eyes. She grabbed her coat, her movements sharp, and stormed toward the door. "You never gave me what I wanted," she hissed. Then the door slammed shut behind her, rattling the frames on the wall, leaving behind a silence more brutal than any scream. The room seemed to collapse inward. The air itself felt stripped of oxygen. Stephen stood motionless, staring at the empty doorway as though, if he waited long enough, she might return. Matthew clung to me, his small body shaking with sobs. "Grandma, what did Mom say? What did she mean? His voice trembled like glass. I pulled him into my arms, rocking him as tears slid down my face. "Shh, my love. None of this is your fault. You are loved. You are safe." But inside I felt a storm of grief, not only for Stephen, but for this little boy whose heart had just been shattered. At the table, Isidora finally broke her silence. Her voice was low but clear, trembling with guilt. "Sister, you didn't have to hurt them like this. I only wanted to help you. I never imagined it would go this far." Her words lingered in the silence. Stephen's shoulders sagged, the weight of betrayal crushing him. He whispered almost to himself, "The woman I married, the woman I thought I knew, gone." For a long moment, no one moved. The house seemed hollowed out, stripped bare by the truth. The days that followed felt like wandering through wreckage. The living room, once filled with Matthew's laughter and Stephen's quiet stories of work, now lay heavy with silence. I moved through the house as though wading through water, each step slower, heavier. Stephen and Araceli filed for divorce within the week. He returned from the courthouse with hollow eyes, his voice flat. She signed the papers without looking at me. She didn't even ask about Matthew. She just walked out with him, Charles, as if we had never existed. I took his hand, holding it tight, though my own was shaking. I wanted to tell him it would be okay, that wounds always heal, but the words stuck in my throat. Some wounds don't heal with time alone. They need love, patience, and new light. Stephen withdrew into himself. He buried his hours in blueprints, drawing lines as if order on paper could fix the chaos in his heart. Other times, he simply sat by the window, watching Matthew play, his eyes hollow with loss. The sadness in him reminded me of Raphael, my husband, in his final days knowing his time was ending, aching at the thought of leaving his family behind. I wanted to hug my son, to take the pain from him, but grief has sharp edges. Sometimes love itself cannot reach through the thorns. And then, quietly, like a candle lit in a darkened room, Isidora began to return. At first, I feared Stephen would reject her presence, the mirror image of the woman who had betrayed him. But her spirit was different, gentle, patient. She came each day with small offerings, a pot of stew, fresh bread, stories for Matthew. She sat with the boy, wiped his tears when he asked, "Auntie, where did my mom go?" One afternoon, I watched from the doorway as Matthew ran to her, his small arms outstretched. "Mom, Isidora, teach me how to draw a little bird." The word mom slipped from him as naturally as breathing. My heart clenched tight. I expected her to correct him, to shake her head. Instead, she smiled through her tears, stroked his hair and whispered, "Of course, my love, but make it the prettiest bird so it can fly high." Tears spilled down my cheeks. In that moment, I understood. Sometimes family is not defined by blood or vows, but by the heart that chooses to stay when others walk away. One evening, as I wiped the kitchen counters, Stephen called me into the living room. His hands were trembling, holding a small ring. Beside him stood Isidora, her cheeks flushed, her eyes wide with nervous light. Stephen knelt before her, his voice breaking but resolute. "Isidora, I don't want to waste any more time. You brought light back to me. You've given Matthew laughter again. Will you be my wife and his mother?" Isidora's tears fell freely as she looked at me, as if seeking permission. I stepped forward, placed my hand over hers and nodded. "You deserve happiness, sweetheart. You've already been part of this family with your love." She collapsed into my arms, sobbing, and I held her as though she were my own daughter. The wedding was simple. No grandeur, no excess. Just sincerity. We decorated the yard with red roses tied along the fence. Matthew wore a little suit, standing proudly as his father's tiny best man. Ivan flew back from work, standing tall beside his brother with a smile as radiant as the day he first wore his pilot's uniform. I sat in the front row, tears streaming down my cheeks. But this time they weren't born of sorrow. They were tears of gratitude, of release, of a heart learning how to hope again. Isidora, in a simple dress, stood beside Stephen, holding his hand with a tenderness that needed no explanation. When they exchanged vows, I knew not believed, but knew that this was a promise built on truth, not deception. Life slowly found its rhythm again. Isidora filled the home with warmth, warm meals on the table, lullabies whispered at night, laughter that stitched our broken pieces together. She sat beside Stephen as he worked late, placing tea by his hand and pressing a kiss to his forehead. She sang Cielito Lindo to Matthew as I once did to my sons. The boy no longer asked for the mother who had abandoned him. Instead, he curled into Isidora's arms, calling her Mom, with a smile radiant enough to heal us all. I watched them, night after night, and felt the ache in my chest ease. The house no longer echoed with silence. It breathed again, filled with voices, laughter, and love. One night, sitting on the porch beneath the Arizona stars, I listened to the wind stirring the garden. Through the window I saw Stephen bent over his blueprints, Matthew giggling as Isidora tickled him, and the kettle whistling gently on the stove. I thought back to the day Ivan called me from the airport, the day my world cracked open. The truth had been cruel, but my Raphael's words came back to me. "The truth will set you free, Stella." And he was right. The truth, harsh and merciless, had shattered us, but it had also delivered us to something stronger, brighter, more real. We had lost a fraud, and in her place, we found a sincere heart. At the end of this story, I turn to you, the listener. These names, these places, I've changed them to protect the people within, but the pain, the betrayal, the courage that is real. I do not share this to judge, but in the hope that someone out there will hear it and pause to reflect. How many mothers suffer in silence within their own homes, afraid to speak? How many remain quiet, choosing peace over truth, while their hearts break in the shadows? If you were in my place, what would you do? Would you keep the silence, or would you dare to reclaim your voice, no matter the cost? Every story is a candle, and perhaps this one will light the path for someone else stumbling in the dark. May God bless us, always. For in courage there is freedom, and in truth there is always a new beginning.